Hi, my name is Sangeeta Kumar, and I'm the CEO and founder of Be the Change Consulting. Join me in Liberated AF, the workplace revolution. This is a podcast where we get to explore what does it take to become the organization that we want to work for. So what is that? The organization I want to work for, it supports my humanity and makes me feel like I belong. It's a place that isn't racist, it isn't extractive. It works for the boomers and the Gen Alphas. There's space for everyone to bring their genius to work. Don't we want to become that? And don't we want to create that? So I have been studying organizational dynamics for over 20 years, and I love working with teams stuck in an entrenched challenge to bring clarity to diverse perspectives and look for ways that human-centered systems. We're going to tell stories, we're going to answer questions, we're going to offer strategies on this podcast. Together, we are going to become something new. Let's go.
Hi, Sangeeta.
Hi, Fangi.
How's it going?
Things are great. It's like I'm moving into my summer mode. I'm getting ready to be in Mexico for a whole month, dude.
Dude, what is your summer mode? And I didn't know you're going to Mexico. Are we going to be able to record more episodes while you're there?
Yeah, as long as there's internet, the podcast prevails.
I love it. You're like, as long as there's internet, so will there be internet?
Well, it'll be nice to get out of the country for a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think there's something about leaving our country and going and being with other folks and seeing how other cultures and other people are holding and being with each other that restores ourselves so we can come back to continue to do this work. But speaking about restoration, um, w- the topic continues on the thing that you and I don't know if we love the most or we've been doing it a lot when we talk about liberation. Our recent newsletter went out, and I got to write something this time, and I was reflecting on.
I gotta tell you, my mom was so impressed. She was like, "That Fong, she's amazing." She was like, "Where is she? The VP? She's the VP." I was like, "She's the VP of Be the Change. What are you talking about?" She thought you were like
Oh my
Minister
gosh.
of Italy now.
Your mom and I go way back. I remember giving her a plant
Oh,
because
she still has it, dude.
I know. Okay, for the listeners, so way back in the day, like 12, 13 years ago, when Sangeeta hired me and I was working in her garage in the hills of Oakland where it was easily 106 degrees. So I hope you all are visualizing this as I'm sweating. She goes, "Oh, I gotta go, I gotta go do something because it's my mom's birthday." And Sangeeta's mom has always been super kind to me. She would poke her head out, offer me food, and I could tell she loves plants. So I remember buying her this really small plant. And through the years, I don't know what this woman did to this plant. It is thriving, and every time she sees me, she would remind me like, "Oh, thank you so much for the plant." I love her. I love her so much.
Wow. And
Okay.
she loves you.
So, the topic that I was reflecting on in this last newsletter, it was thinking about how you and I approach this podcast. And unlike many other, always you and I are open to be like, what's the worst that can happen? Let's give it a try. If it doesn't work, then we don't have to do it. And I realized this was the first time in a really long time where a big project like this, I was not stuck in my head and giving myself this feedback of who's going to listen. Do we have enough to say? Are we smart enough to do this? Are we considered expert? I had none of those thoughts. And I was reflecting because of all the work that our team, you know, you, me, Lauren, Shelley, and those folks who've been with us in the different iterations of Be the Change, where we were truly doing the liberation work and in the sense of really reflecting on who we are and how we hold leadership, how we offer each other feedback, how we receive feedback.
There's the thing that we keep coming back to. It's all about
Yeah. And so this is the thing around feedback. And so I know that you've been working with some clients and you and I have been sitting with this idea of what happens when you offer, a supervisor offers feedback. They're holding all the things, right? They're doing all the work. They listen to all the podcasts and it doesn't land very well. And then shit hits the fan. So let's
Yeah.
open up the space and talk about that a little bit.
Okay, cool. And I think it's interesting because like there's like the world of like we're seeing them and the macro world, like where equity and justice and like liberties and rights are being threatened and questioned and dismantled. Right. So there's like this thing happening at the macro level. And at the same time, right, there's like there can be like a helplessness that comes up for folks in that. I know I feel,
Yeah.
right, some level of despair and I want to escape. And I think there is always the place for us to continuously rehearse for our own liberation and
Mm.
practice. And so the thing that I think we're going to talk about today, there's like it feels so micro to me compared to like the
Yeah.
macro shifts and changes that are also simultaneously happening. But I also think there is something like a divine math to it that like the thing that is very small and minute, you know, like that fractal, it is a repeating concept that gets escalated and
Mm.
bigger. It's how we got to the level um of this precipice, you know, that we're standing on right now that we might swing all the way back to like a very feudalistic
Yeah.
fascist mindset. So I don't know. I there is something accordioning in my head of like the small to the big. So anyway, that might be just an exercise.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think about that, and I think about what I just shared is that for me, well, when I think about the feedback and my evolution of it, it's also like, what was I, um, how did I associate getting feedback, and what did feedback do for me, and who was giving me feedback, right? And so, in this work that we're doing, and as you are coaching leaders, I think one of the big thing that comes up is that what happens when feedback about performance is conflated as an attack on identity, especially if the group is doing that work, right? That group is, a part
Care
of,
about
yeah,
inclusion.
racial equity groups. They're doing the diversity and belonging within the organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, great. So yeah, let's dig into that connection. So like if we kind of just like set the scene, I have a couple of clients I think and I
Yeah.
remember this happening to me where am, you know, I if I'm imagining that we're speaking to leaders out there. So
Yeah.
or supervisors. So imagine you have a person that you're like, I love this person. They're generally, you know, killing the game. They're doing really good work. Um, and there is an opportunity for growth, right? And so if you have created a strong feedback culture and you know you use like you know you're thinking not like, oh, this person is a pain because they have this skill gap that is causing me extra work, right? So
Mm.
I'm assuming that's not what's happening here, that we're actually we've resolved like that mentality, and you're standing at the next level, which is I see this person, they have all these skills and benefits and assets, you know, they're doing a great job in like 70 to 80% of their role, and I see one maybe a place where they could elevate their work or you know, close a gap, right? So it's really like from the place of I'm conspiring for your success.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that matters in this in the case study that we're about to set up, because if the come from is punishing, this all sort of like
Right. It's different.
it's different. So imagine if I imagine like scenarios where I'm like, oh, there's a gap that I want to close in a person because I want what they're saying to be better received in the world, right? So
Mhm.
and then let's say I offer that feedback. So I'm saying to someone like you,
Yeah.
like, "Hey, Fong, you know, the presentation that you gave, there were, you know, great points, lots of you're clearly working really hard, but some of your strategic rationale didn't come through. It sort of didn't have like a sense of like purpose or vision. I got understood what you are doing, but I missed some of like the bigger, you know, north stars. I wanna see some of that, some more of that. So that's like one
Mm.
very specific example.
I mean, you literally did that to me 2 weeks ago when I was, like, sitting down with a scope of work, and you said, "I love this, but I'm confused. I need a Gantt chart. Can we create a Gantt chart? And I'm like, yeah. And we opened up a thing and we spent 15 to 20 minutes creating a Gantt chart. And you're like, now I get what you're doing, but I needed a different way of looking at so we can get sharp. So yeah, I mean,
Great. Okay, good.
that was us.
So it happens, right? It's like it's
Yeah.
small, it could be technical, and it doesn't have to necessarily be a big deal. But that's a great
Mhm.
example where you
Yeah.
could have, and I see this happen a lot in organizations
Yeah.
where maybe that request that I'm making of you, like I need to see this in a Gantt chart, right? So maybe that communicates that and I think this happens a lot in like when you're in this like world of the language of inclusion, and we have
Mhm.
maybe hired people or said to people like your lived experience really matters, and we want you to bring your lived experience to this work.
Yeah.
So you might have interpreted what I was saying as I have poured my heart and soul and thinking, and I worked really hard to get this proposal to this place. And now I'm presenting it to you, and there's a lot of vulnerability maybe
Right.
inside of you. And I honestly, like between us, I would not anticipate that. Like even what you're saying about the newsletter, I never think about things like that. Like who's gonna read it? Like I'm like, what do I want to say? And do I look cute in that picture? And but that makes sense that you're thinking
Yeah.
about like the other side of it because you're trying to justify. You're like, what will justify the work that I'm doing? Which I know you think that, and I never think about that, right? So like
Yeah.
the fact that we are sitting in two different places and holding different roles, even though we're friends and colleagues and we work closely
Yeah.
together, it doesn't mean we're approaching our work in the same way, right? So this thing about the Gantt chart, maybe it could land on you, right? Another way it could have landed on you is for you to hear it as the way I've organized this information is not strong enough. I
Mhm.
already have imposter syndrome that my ideas are not good
Mhm.
enough, that I'm not clear enough. Maybe some part of your identity gets triggered of like, oh, I'm an immigrant. I learned English as a second language.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm making things up, but that could happen, right? The way you hear it
Yeah.
isn't about oh you it could push your mind from thinking about Sangita couldn't understand this information, and so where is my opportunity to better present it or represent it in a way for her to understand. It could feel like you hired me for my lived experiences. I am bringing you my lived experiences, and now you're telling me the way that I'm presenting my lived experience doesn't match
Mm.
you, and you're asking me to conform to your methodology or your standards so that it's more easy for you to understand. So it could feel like I'm asking you to contort to a standard that you don't believe in, or that you feel is actually a gatekeeping standard that puts people like you on the margins and keeps people like me who can read a Gantt chart
Yeah.
on the inside. Does that make sense?
That is a great, yeah, it totally makes sense. And what is fascinating, you're spot on everything. And I want to say maybe like 8 years ago in this organization, you and I still kind of similar roles. I would have felt everything you said, check, 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 check,
Mhm,
check.
mhm.
Like 100%, even though 8 years ago, we still had prior to that 7 years of working together, a long time. For sure, 100%. I would have questioned myself. I did sit there. Um, I would question my worth to you, and I would just be sitting in an echo chamber of just not super positive thoughts around how I feel about my relationship with you and the organization. Um, and now, now not, because we've gone to a point where we have more relational trust. And I can go into that and say that, but I think in that feedback and how we pivoted, I'm like, this is amazing because now it's more clear for us to move forward in this work together. And now we know for next time. But I would have to say that what you painted out, that scenario was definitely a mindset I held for a very long time, receiving feedback from you.
Hmm. Sorry.
Not anymore though, so, I mean, you feel bad if you want, but I'm just saying that for sure, you're definitely I that would have been a direct hit to my identity. identities.
Identities, right.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a book that I'll plug. It's called Thanks for the Feedback.
Oh, yeah.
Have you read that? We can find the author. But it talks about different forms of feedback
Yeah.
and why it triggers us. And there's like one that is like a truth trigger, right? Which if you were giving me this feedback, even now, right? You're talking about something that happened 8 years ago. And if you're like, you erased my identity.
Yeah.
Right. That is a very disorienting moment in leadership that I have felt. I am feeling it now as we're talking about something that happened 8 years ago. I know people out there feel it because I do care about equity. I care about your identities. I care about you. I want to dismantle the very system that you are describing, right? In that pushback of like, oh, what does this Gantt chart represent? Of course, I want to dismantle, that linear structural, if Gantt chart is actually has become a proxy, right? If that is like a symbol of linear structured verbal thinking versus like associative, relational, informal, oral, right? Like if we're pitting those ideas again and the Gantt chart becomes the stand-in for all the things that are more dominant culture,
Mhm.
it can feel like erasure. And that I'm trying to dismantle those things. And at the same time, maybe if I'm like, I won't understand this, and I am one audience of yours, but you're writing this proposal, it's gonna go to people who are even less in this bubble than me. They're really
Yeah.
not gonna understand what is
Right.
happening. So um we're now conflating, right? Like I'm trying to describe like here's a standard that I want us to uphold, which is that we do our first draft thinking, which is like all the creative, messy post-its on the wall and like stuff on the whiteboard. And now we have to figure out how to organize it so that the people who we're trying to influence can understand it.
That's right.
And so, how do we move from that place? From like, oh, so the truth feedback, right? The truth trigger, if I'm talking about that, the types of feedback, the truth trigger there is Fong is giving me feedback that says that I am not as woke or social justice or caring or collaborative or relational or whatever, right? I am now blending with the very systems that we are trying to dismantle. So now I'm stuck because you've hit me on a truth that I don't want to accept about myself.
Mm.
And I'd have hit you in these forms of feedback in an identity trigger that I've given you feedback that of course that wasn't my intention, but what I hit was the feedback I've given you is that your identity is wrong. It's not that what you did could be improved. I'm not even saying what you did was wrong, right? So what I want to
Yeah.
convey is what you did, we can take what you have and we can now like make it come to life. Let's shine this up together. Instead of communicating that I am in this with you, I first said this is not good enough, or what I communicated, this is not good enough. Then that led to you're not good enough, and then that led to you must not be good enough because of who you are in this world. And that symbol of Gantt chart opened up that gateway to like you feeling your identities. That makes sense?
Yeah.
So identity trigger, truth triggers on the two sides. And now we're both triggered. And what happens when two people are triggered is we all shrink into our like more childlike selves. We lose executive function. We become activated. We're in fight or flight or disassociate mode. And we're actually not able to listen to each other. Right. And so I think there's that in this moment of like where I think people need to go is to be able to pause and say, oh, we have activated some feedback triggers with each other. And again, I think that language can be very helpful because I can kind of cycle through like, why is this so hard? Instead of Fong is so sensitive. She can't take feedback. She internalizes everything. I am trying to help her. I'm trying to conspire for her growth, right? That's not going to help me shift. Even if all of that is true from my perspective, it's not helping.
It's for both parties, right? Both parties have to be able to be in a place where and if that's a strategy, right? If the other way, the proxy to all those tools is conforming to white supremacy standards, I think the flip to that is being able to say that maybe the first thing we do when we get into that depressing spiral is to say that this feedback is really hard. Or
Yes,
how? Just even that pause, right? It's not it doesn't even go into reset because there's too much stuff going on, but both being able to say, "That's really hard feedback," and then going to the next thing, I feel like that might be the first jump.
totally. Great. So let's acknowledge, oops,
Yeah.
we hit a speed bump in our relational like highway, or a pit. What's it called when there's a hole in the road?
A a pothole?
Pothole.
Oh my gosh. I don't even know.
Good job. So yeah, we've hit a pothole. We're stumbling, and
Yeah.
let's not act like we didn't like if we're
Yes.
falling, like let's not act like we didn't just trip and stumble. Let's take a pause here and just say oops. And then where I think it needs to go next
Yeah.
is people in leadership. So now we're talking like you're saying there is work to do on both sides of the street. The me in that scenario, the Gantt chart scenario,
Mm,
I get to like be like, "Uh-oh, what did I do that made Fong so upset?" Fong is a rational human being who does great work. And if I gave her this feedback and she is behaving so sensitively, it should tell me something, right?
mm,
I should catch this moment of activation and say, "Oh, when it's hysterical, it's historical." Right? Like
mm,
that feeling of like you're reacting too big for this. The thing that I think leaders need to get to is this thing of like that level of over activation means something. It's a tell.
mm,
And I should not now at that point, if I'm like, tell me, Fong, tell me what's wrong. What should I have done differently? What you're not going to be able to tell me because you have fallen
mm.
into a pothole. You're on the ground, your knees are skinned, and you think I pushed you into that pothole.
Yeah.
And so you're like, and now I'm like, what's wrong? I'm your friend. You're like, you just knocked me over. I'm not gonna talk to you. So that's like one side, right? We have to
Right.
our job in that moment is to
Yeah.
not expect the employee to be able to talk to us and like communicate with us and treat us like we're human because they feel like we just treated them like they're not human. And
Mm,
when there's like dehumanization in the mix, the leader has to go first. The employee should not have to go first because they're already scared and we're asking them to subjugate themselves. So that could be one moment. I do think the Fong in this example, right, the person in your role, there is so much more that can happen if that person is also self-aware and can say,
mhm,
Sagita is not a like not someone who's pushing dominant culture standards. um, I wonder what is happening in this moment that is making her ask me to pretzel myself. In service of what? And then
mhm,
do I actually am critiquing the standard. The standard feels unfair. How do I talk about the standard feeling unfair with Sangita? So if the person in your role can be like, I want to talk about this standard of organizing our information in a Gantt chart because I feel like we shouldn't have to contort to that standard. I get that some people have been conditioned to see information like that, but that not everyone is. That's not how I see it. So why do we have to uphold that standard? That feels unfair. And you're asking me to like meet you where you are. Why can't you meet me where I am? I want to unpack this, right? So if you can come at it to me with a to talk about the standard, not the identity, right? If you go as a um Asian woman, newcomer to this country, first in my family to go to college, that felt weaponizing. It is not actionable. It's not an actionable conversation, right? If you
mhm.
stay at
Right,
that
right.
level of identity, it's going to keep you in this kind of armored and attacking place. Even if what you are feeling is really hurt.
Mm,
That
mm,
hurt, we cannot solve that hurt when your armor is on and you're also attacking. And okay, so that is the hope is that the employee can show up in that way. But most of us are not going to show up like that until it's been modeled for us a couple of times.
Okay. So it makes sense that in this scenario, of course, the leader has a positional power. So that's why you're offering all the steps in which the leader will have to reflect and pause and be curious and open. And then at the same time, what would happen for the employee in this scenario, myself, and if I have some self-awareness in doing the work, I think w- I'm sitting here with what happens when we've mentioned weaponizing of the tools is that when we're doing this racial equity work, this liberation work, and then folks can't quite get out of the conforming to the standards, right? So in this scenario, we're talking about a Gantt chart that is a little bit more linear standard, but it's not that, right? It's not that. Like, how do we get to the point where a leader can give their staff member feedback with another way of approaching a design so it could be more expansive, not because of the standard? Do you know what I mean? Like, it could because you said the Gantt chart is in proxy to the ways in which white dominant standards are. Yes. And how do we move away from that? Because it's not that. It's a tool. It's a tool that if we were in right relationship, that feedback would not land anyway like that, but more so, oh, didn't know how to do it that way. Let's do it that way. Cool. We don't have to do it that way every single time. But in this particular one, that's a new approach so we can get ourselves more organized so we can speak to the client and to other team members.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. So I love that. Yeah. What you're saying, how do we get to the place where we could use a Gantt chart or not use a Gantt chart and it's a tool? We see it as a tool and not as a weapon.
Right, and really, the idea of, like, naming when we conform to standards, right? Because that's what happens when when feedback is given and when there is an ouch and it feels there's not enough relational trust, so it feels more towards the identities, and that's when, that it gets weaponized, I guess more so like that.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, okay. I think that is one great like starting point question, right? Is what is the level of relational trust between
Mhm.
and it could be that, maybe there isn't enough. So that's a question for us to assess, right? It's why investing in the relationship is always like it's so important so that we can steer in these sticky moments, in the pothole moments. Um but even if there is a lot of relational trust, if we've triggered these types of triggers, a truth trigger and
Yeah,
an identity trigger, if it happens between you and I, it will hurt worse. Right? So
yeah,
because there's a ton of relational trust, harm, like when you hurt me, I feel it for weeks and years.
yeah.
When like somebody on the street does it, I'm like, "Oh, well, I always thought everybody in the world was a jerk anyway." So, okay, I think that's a piece.
Yeah.
I think then the next thing is we have to examine the standard. So, if I have an employee who says to me, or has communicated, right? If I get this identity trigger, if I'm seeing evidence, right? Because I want us to be really clear, it is very rare that we will get this feedback of what you said feels like you're erasing the contributions that I can easily bring. And what you're asking me to do is to become a different person, and I'm scared that I can't become that different person, first of all. Second of all, I don't want to become a different person. Third of all, it really hurts that you wish I was a different person, right? All
Mm.
that. They're not going to say all that. That's too
No.
vulnerable.
Well,
If
mm-mm.
they even know that they think it. So
Right.
the reason to use those like the screen of how of diagnosing a type of trigger is so that I can say, oh, if it's possible I hit an identity trigger, it's possible that what Fong is experiencing is a feeling of erasure. And why might she get there? Oh, maybe the standard itself, this thing that I asked her to do, is making her feel bad. So can I get to that analysis by myself without needing you to be a part of it? Absolutely. Or,
Mhm.
what I'm seeing a lot of the people that I'm coaching is they're coming to me and we're workshopping it together. So it doesn't have to be that I figure it out with you. I can figure it out with someone else, and
Right,
then I can
right.
show up with some analysis. So let's say I get a partner to help me unpack it, and I've kind of I see it like this. Then the second thing I think I have to do is I have to examine the standard itself. So I have to say, okay, do I need does it have to be a Gantt chart? Maybe I shouldn't have asked for a Gantt chart. Maybe I asked for a specific thing instead of naming what the challenge was. So that could be a supervision move, right? Maybe I directed my employee to a very specific strategy, when what I could do, which can feel micromanaging, when maybe what I could do is say more of, Fong, the ideas that you're presenting here are fantastic. These are right on. I am having a hard time seeing how it stacks in a sequence. How could you help me see that? I think it's important that I understand like the flow of this. So now I could bring you into the problem solving instead of telling you what to do. That might help. It might not, right? So I could think about sort of like a more conversational approach. And then let's say you went to, well, it seems like I know traditionally people do a Gantt chart, or maybe you would say, well, what are some ideas, or how could it look? And I say, well, we could try a Gantt chart, and you're like, well, that feels very, dominant culture, and I don't want to use that, whatever. Then I could say, okay, let's examine it. Let's think, am I asking for something that we don't absolutely need? So I think that's an important move, to be like, am I asking
That's an important
for
move.
my comfort? Could I just make myself a Gantt chart? Maybe you don't need to make it, right? If it's not essential for the deliverable, but it's essential for my personal understanding, I could make myself a chart and then say, hey, I tried to make something. Does this resonate? This is what I'm thinking, right? So I could take the labor off of you, do it myself, and come back to you and say, I made an extension tool for my own learning, just like people have to do all the time. I know there are times where I say a verbal presentation and team members are taking notes on what I said, and they're not saying to me, make a PowerPoint, put this into like they're doing what they need, and that is also okay. So that it could be that. Or the third thing is we could say, we could talk about it, like, I think there probably are other ways than a Gantt chart, but who we're presenting this to, this proposal that you're writing is going to go in front of a team of 20 principals in LA, and they're not going to have a ton of time to diagnose or dissect. I think they are used to seeing Gantt charts, and I understand that it doesn't have to be a Gantt chart. I think Gantt charts are like one specific, maybe even a tool of dominant culture. And if we are trying to shift the dominant culture of that system, it might make sense to meet them with the tools that they are familiar with, to support their comfort and their understanding, because the conversation we want to have with them is not about timeline and scaffolding. The conversation we want to have with them is a higher conversation about the change that we are trying to bring them through the capacity building we're going to do with them, right? Which is more the
Right,
specifics of
So
what.
you're saying being in that moment, using the tools that are could be classified as dominant culture, in that for that moment, it's to support the translation, but also to set the credibility so you can, it's almost like you got to meet them in the middle in order to move them forward with the change that you can share, because you can't go in there with something so new that they wouldn't want to digest or to subscribe to. I'm just thinking, because I know that some people feel really, when a supervisor tells their team, "Oh, can you do it this way? Because this is why this group would prefer to do it," and that person will have an ouch, right? Because they're like, "I don't want to conform to that standard," but that standard in that moment is crucial to
Yeah.
move things forward. Can you speak a little bit more about that? Like, I think that's a real thing. I think that happens. That's the feedback that gets given, and people sit with that.
Okay, totally, it might be triggering to use a tool or a methodology that doesn't feel authentic to you, or more than that, that it feels like you're selling yourself out, right? That you're conforming to a system that you're trying to shift. But the issue is that the people with the most power to transform the systems, right? Which is like, it's not us. We are trying, we need to work with people outside of us. And we have to meet them where they're at and bring them along with us. And if
Mm.
if someone is used to receiving a written proposal, and I see funders doing this, they're like, oh, we are used to receiving written proposals, but in an attempt to make things more accessible and inclusive, we will now take video. You can submit your
Oh,
proposal.
yeah.
Or someone's like, oh, well, then why can't we do write a poem or make an interpretive dance? Or the thing is, the people who are making those decisions don't know how to understand the wisdom of
Right.
of those
Right. Right.
alternative modes, right? And so you can say, I we can say, I want someone with lived experience because it expands the perspective of what we can offer. But that has to be couched with the understanding of how no matter like how much extra perspective you want to add in, it can be like 10%, like a 10 degrees of variation from the standard culture. So if the standard practice is a proposal and I show up with an interpretive dance, I'm probably not going to be taken seriously. And it doesn't matter that I believe in it or that my team believes in it. My team is not the people that I'm trying to like influence or shift the perspective of. And so this thing about organizing and change management is you have to meet the people with the influence where they're at and give them maybe like we need to push people out of their comfort zone, but we have to be strategic about where we are pushing them out of their comfort zone. I don't need to trigger them. I had a funder look at some the curriculum that we write.
Yeah.
The first cover art that we chose back when we made it, she looked at the cover art. It was this beautiful piece of art by Fabiana Rodriguez. She looked at it and she said, it feels violent. Now that was some like a racist interpretation of of young kids of color who were playing in like, it was like the style of art it was gorgeous. It was beautiful in my perspective. And her first reaction was, this looks violent. And I was like, a part of me was like, oh my God, I hate this woman.
Right.
Why are we working with her? Well, guess what? We're working with her because she got the money and we need it. Number two, let's do whatever we want. We chose the cover art. It's my project. Okay, I could have done that. But if I did that, she probably wouldn't have funded the next set of curriculum. And so now I have to choose, right? So we are also making incremental choices of where do we want to, which hill are we going to stand on? Because we know there is a fight. There are many fights in order to push our perspective forward. And we have to choose where that perspective is going to, like, which juice is worth the squeeze. Because if we fight for every single thing, we will lose allies. And part of increasing our tent, increasing solidarity in order to shift the conditions of the world, it starts in these smaller, minute moments. And so there's like a place of like understanding the equity muscle that we're going for 10% change. And where should that 10% happen? We have to strategically choose, which means the rest of the 90% is kind of conformist based on the system that you're in, right? So you decide that what's 10%, what's 90% based on the standards of the field that you're in. Yeah, I don't
Dang, that's hard to hear.
know.
And
It's kind
no,
of
it is, right? It's kind of a bummer, and it makes sense, and it's still quite a bummer, especially when people are out there wanting to, live their values, and then moments like this where you're even just talking about that, the breaking down the percentage of conformity, it completely makes sense, and change is incremental, and it is also hard, right? It's hard. The reality is like, that's what it is. That's what it is. And then it makes me go back to then, that leader who's giving the feedback to that staff member. There's all of this packed into that, right? If that person received that feedback and they're holding all of that and it hits into their identity, then it is hard to come back from. This episode's running juicy and long, and I love it. I wanted to ask you then, in this particular scenario here, and everyone is harmed and they're sad. what are some of the things that the leader could do and to also invite the employee to do to support the restoration and to build their relationship again so then they can get more aligned on how they can offer one another feedback?
Hmm. Well, okay. I think if you got two people who are unable to have a conversation with each other, you give it time, right? So you're just like,
Okay.
I get that our relationship kind of fell into a pit hole. Is that the right word? Pit hole? Anyway, whatever. I get that our
I think
relationship
so.
slipped into something. It stumbled. Um, when we are ready to, when we're both kind of emotionally back online, let's find a time to chat. Right. So I think
Mm,
acknowledging it feels mucky and yucky, and then saying, let's talk about it when we're both ready. Right. So slow it down and let the slower person set the pace. That's the first thing. The second thing is when you come back together for the leader to be able to say, I might not have communicated my feedback correctly, because that is definitely what happened. Like it didn't land. I wasn't erasing you. So start with the assumption that I think that what I said felt like an erasure of your identity, and what I actually wanted to convey is I want what you're bringing here
yeah.
to be like elevated and activated. And I want to help you, like, whatever, right? So how do we really say, like, communicate that I want to be on the same side as you? I'm not standing in your way and controlling you and gatekeeping you. And I don't mean to micromanage you into these like little templates and techniques as a way to oppress you, but as a way to liberate your ideas, which is where I think our focus
Yeah.
should be.
Yeah.
And I get that that didn't happen. And so let's come back and let's talk about this standard, right? So I get that what it feels like is that the standard is making you feel like you have to compromise yourself. But what I actually think we need here is a dual fluency. We have to figure out how to
Mm,
take your lived experience, match it up with the master's tools so that we can get, to 10 degrees of change, because this is how change happens in a system. And I think this is also instruction, right? Employees need to know how change actually happens in a system because they don't understand. None of us understand. We think that if you tell somebody to do something differently, they do something differently and everything changes. But
yeah.
look at the macro systems that we're in. Congress doesn't have all the power. Congress says, "Oh, we need the Senate." The Senate says, "Oh, we need the president." The president is making executive orders. The executive orders are not standing. Then it goes like we have built systems that change very slowly, and that is in many ways to our benefit. And so I
Yeah.
think there is a truth here that not systems do not change all at once. They change 10 degrees at a time, and we have to be legible and credible to get in the room so that we can influence the people who we most want to change. And what I want us to be is very strategic about the kind of change that we're trying to make. I think that's the third thing. And then the fourth thing that I see people do is when we hit this identity based feedback, if I'm like, oh my God, I gave Fong feedback and she called me a racist, an anti feminist, and a capitalist. And if I decide to let that stop me, I get that I'm a human, right, in that moment. And we're not allowed to do that. I don't
Mm.
get to abandon you because you are behaving in a way that is hard for me to deal with. This is how people of color stop getting developed, right? They come and it is unstrategic to us. So I'll say that, right? This identity fight of like you said that to me, it hurt me as a woman. It is a conversation stopper, and that's how we're getting in our own way. But supervisors and people of color hear that, they get scared and they halt. And so if
Yeah.
I abandon you in that moment, I'm like, oh, Fong is very sensitive. I'm gonna stop conspiring for her success. You will be left out wherever you are treading water. You won't be able to grow because there is a legitimate gap that is going to keep you from making influence in the system that we're in. You could go somewhere else and do it in a different way. But so the last thing is that I have to fight. The supervisor has to fight for the growth and the development of the
Yeah.
employee. And that is where human centered, we're still human centered, right? It's like the tactics that we use are many and varied, but at the end of the day, we want to conspire for each other's success and be in right relationship along the way. Know that bumps are going to happen. And when those bumps happen, we stay in conversation and communication to find our way through it. So
Mm.
those are a couple moves.
That's right. And then you teed up the next episode around identity fight. Y'all, we hope there's some nuggets in there for you, and we apologize if we butchered the pothole speed bump. I hope we get sponsored by Gantarts. And then say the name of that book again. Say the name of that book again.
Thanks for the feedback.
Thanks for the feedback. Well, thank you for the feedback. And y'all, thank you so much for, again, tuning in and listening to us and learning with us and liberating with us. Until the next time, this is Liberated AF. See you in the next episode. Bye.
We hope this conversation provided helpful insight and inspired you to create a more inclusive and liberated workplace. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please subscribe, leave a review, and share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. Your support makes a huge difference in helping us reach more listeners like you. We love to hear your thoughts on today's topic. Connect with us on social media and drop a comment. You can find all the links in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.